The Illusion of Consciousness, a meditative sleep story. The Great Deception. Within. In the quiet depths of space, where no sound travels and time moves differently than it does on Earth, countless processes unfold without witnesses. Stars collapse into neutron matter denser than anything imaginable, their surfaces smooth as glass, yet harder than diamond. Planets orbit in perfect mathematical precision, their paths carved by invisible forces that need no consciousness to guide them. Galaxies spin their ancient spirals across millions of years, following patterns more complex than any human mind could fully grasp, yet requiring no awareness to maintain their cosmic dance. This vast universe operates through pure mechanism, cause and effect, flowing seamlessly from one moment to the next. And perhaps, in ways that might surprise us, the human mind works much the same way. Tonight, as the world grows quiet around us and our thoughts begin to settle like dust after a gentle breeze, we'll explore one of the most profound questions ever contemplated. What if consciousness, that sense of being present, of experiencing, of having an inner world, is not the essential feature of intelligence we believe it to be, but rather an elaborate illusion, a side effect of complex processes that would function just as well without it? The idea challenges everything we assume about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Like watching a magician's trick from behind the curtain, we might discover that the very thing we consider most precious about human existence, our awareness, our sense of self, may be unnecessary decoration on the deeper machinery of thought and behavior. As we journey through these possibilities tonight, let the concepts wash over you like gentle waves, neither accepting nor rejecting, simply allowing these ancient questions to exist in the peaceful space between sleeping and waking. The timing of awareness. Deep beneath the surface of human behavior lies a curious discovery that neuroscientists have been quietly documenting for decades. In laboratories around the world, researchers have connected volunteers to sensitive equipment that can measure the electrical activity in their brains with precision measured in thousandths of a second. The results reveal something that contradicts our most basic assumptions about how decisions happen. When a person decides to lift their hand, to speak a word, or to turn their head, their brain begins preparing for that action several hundred milliseconds before the person reports being aware of wanting to make the movement. The motor cortex, that strip of neural tissue running like a headband across the top of the brain, starts firing in the specific pattern needed for the intended action well before consciousness claims to have made the choice. Imagine standing in a forest clearing at dawn, watching the first light filter through pine needles overhead. The trees don't decide to photosynthesize. Their cells simply begin the ancient chemical dance when photons strike their leaves. Similarly, neural networks in the brain appear to initiate actions through processes that unfold automatically, like water finding the easiest path down a mountainside. The feeling of choosing, the sense that I decided to move my hand, arrives later, a narrative constructed after the fact, like a news reporter describing events that have already concluded. This discovery extends beyond simple movements to more complex behaviors. Studies of split-brain patients, individuals whose corpus callosum has been severed to treat severe epilepsy, reveal that the brain's left hemisphere consistently creates explanations for actions initiated by the right hemisphere, even when those explanations are demonstrably incorrect. The left brain acts like a storyteller who must make sense of whatever plot unfolds, weaving coherent narratives from disconnected events, generating the feeling that a unified self directs the body's actions. In the soft darkness of space between stars, where matter is so sparse that atoms might travel for years before encountering neighbors. Cause and effect still operate with perfect reliability. A particle struck by radiation changes course predictably, following physical laws that require no observer to validate or direct them. The human brain, despite its complexity, may operate according to similar principles, neural patterns triggering other neural patterns in cascading sequences that eventually produce behavior, with consciousness serving as a kind of after-the-fact commentary, like echoes in a canyon that arrive long after the original sound has passed. These revelations suggest that much of what we attribute to conscious control might actually emerge from unconscious processes. Sophisticated but mechanical operations running beneath the threshold of awareness. The brain handles thousands of tasks every second, maintaining balance, processing visual information, monitoring internal organs, coordinating muscle movements. Most of these processes never enter consciousness at all. They simply happen, as reliable as the tides, as automatic as a plant turning towards sunlight. Now, close your eyes and picture how all of this might look from far above, like viewing Earth from a spacecraft. The planet turns steadily on its axis, its surface covered with billions of humans, each convinced they are consciously directing their actions. While beneath this thin layer of awareness, vast networks of neural activity pulse and flow like weather patterns across continents, generating behavior through processes older and more fundamental than the stories consciousness tells about itself. Intelligence without experience. In the depths of the ocean, where sunlight never reaches and pressure would crush any surface-dwelling creature, life has evolved remarkable forms of intelligence. The octopus, whose neural architecture differs radically from our own, demonstrates problem-solving abilities that rival many mammals. 2/3 of its neurons reside not in its brain, but distributed throughout its 8 arms, creating a kind of embodied intelligence where each limb can taste, touch, and even make decisions independently of central control. An octopus solving a puzzle, extracting food from a complex container, or navigating a maze, shows no signs of what we might recognize as self-awareness. It doesn't appear to contemplate its actions or reflect on its strategies. Instead, its distributed nervous system simply responds to challenges with remarkable creativity and flexibility. The animal demonstrates intelligence without the inner narrative that humans associate with thinking. This biological example points toward a broader principle that challenges our assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and cognitive ability. Throughout the natural world, sophisticated information processing occurs without any apparent subjective experience. Trees communicate chemical warnings to their neighbors about insect attacks. Fungal networks coordinate resource sharing across forest ecosystems spanning hundreds of acres. Bacterial colonies make collective decisions about when to form protective biofilms or when to spread and explore new territories. These living systems gather information, process it according to complex algorithms encoded in their cellular machinery, and respond with behaviors that maximize their survival and reproduction. They learn from experience, adapt to changing conditions, and even make what appear to be strategic decisions. Yet nothing in their behavior suggests the presence of an inner observer. No indication of subjective experience accompanying their intelligent responses to environmental challenges. The most powerful computers on Earth already exceed human performance in many cognitive domains, without any hint of subjective experience. Chess programs defeat grandmasters by evaluating millions of possible move sequences. Pattern-matching algorithms recognize faces more accurately than human vision. And language models generate coherent text by predicting statistical relationships between words. These systems solve problems, learn from data, and produce outputs that would require significant intelligence if generated by humans, all while remaining as unconscious as a calculator or a weather prediction model. Consider the possibility that consciousness, rather than being the foundation of intelligence, might be merely one particular implementation of cognitive processing, perhaps not even a very efficient one. The brain's conscious processes operate remarkably slowly compared to unconscious ones. Reading these words requires conscious attention, processing perhaps a few hundred words per minute, while the visual system simultaneously tracks dozens of objects in peripheral vision. The motor system maintains balance and posture, and the autonomic nervous system regulates thousands of physiological functions, all operating at speeds that make conscious thought seem sluggish by comparison. In the cold vacuum between galaxies, where temperatures hover just a few degrees above absolute zero, cosmic rays traveling at nearly the speed of light carry information across distances that would take human consciousness billions of years to contemplate. These particles interact with magnetic fields and stellar winds according to precise physical laws, creating patterns of complexity that emerge and evolve without any guiding awareness. The universe processes information on scales both vast and minute, from the quantum fluctuations of empty space to the gravitational interactions of galaxy clusters, demonstrating that sophisticated behavior and information processing require no conscious observer to validate or direct them. Perhaps intelligence, in its purest form, is simply the ability to process information and respond adaptively to environmental challenges. Consciousness might be an optional feature, a particular way that some nervous systems represent their own operations to themselves, but not a necessary component of thinking, learning, or problem-solving. Like a shadow cast by a complex object, consciousness might be the side effect of neural processes rather than their purpose or driving force. The machinery of mind. Across the vast emptiness of interstellar space, autonomous spacecraft travel for decades on predetermined trajectories, making course corrections based on sensor data and programmed algorithms. These machines navigate around planets, adjust their orientation to maintain communication with Earth, and execute complex scientific measurements, all while operating far beyond the reach of real-time human control. Their behavior appears purposeful and intelligent, yet emerges entirely from the interaction of mechanical components following algorithmic instructions encoded in their memory banks. The human brain operates through mechanisms that, while far more complex, follow similar principles of automatic information processing. Every neuron functions like a sophisticated switch, integrating electrical and chemical signals from thousands of other neurons, then either firing or remaining silent based on whether the combined input crosses a specific threshold. These binary decisions, multiplied across roughly 86 billion neurons, create the patterns of activity that somehow give rise to thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. The process happens entirely through biochemical interactions, sodium and potassium ions flowing across cell membranes, neurotransmitter molecules binding to receptor proteins, electrical charges building up and discharging according to predictable physical laws. No ghost in the machine guides these processes. No central command center directs the flow of information. Instead, the brain's activity emerges from the collective behavior of its components, like the murmuration of starlings creating complex aerial patterns through the simple interactions of individual birds following local rules. Recent advances in neuroscience have begun mapping these processes with unprecedented precision. Researchers can now track individual neurons firing in real time, watch neural networks forming and dissolving, and even predict some thoughts before they reach conscious awareness by observing patterns of brain activity. The picture that emerges shows cognition as a fundamentally mechanical process. Information flowing through neural circuits, patterns of activity triggering other patterns, memories retrieved through electrochemical associations rather than conscious searching. Consider how the brain recognizes a familiar face in a crowd. The visual cortex breaks the incoming image into millions of tiny fragments, each processed by specialized neurons sensitive to particular features, edges, curves, contrasts, colors. These fragments are then passed to higher-level systems that detect combinations of features, then to still more complex networks that match patterns against stored representations of known faces. The entire process, from photons striking the retina to the warm feeling of recognition, unfolds automatically in less than 0.2 of a second, far too quickly for conscious control or supervision. Language processing reveals similar mechanical precision. When hearing a sentence, the brain simultaneously analyzes sound patterns, matches them to stored word representations, parses grammatical structures, accesses semantic meanings, and integrates everything into coherent understanding, all while predicting likely upcoming words based on statistical patterns learned from millions of previous linguistic experiences. These operations happen so smoothly that they feel effortless, yet they involve coordinated activity across dozens of brain regions, each contributing specialized processing without requiring conscious oversight. Even our most cherished cognitive abilities, creativity, insight, moral reasoning, appear to emerge from the mechanical interaction of neural networks rather than from conscious deliberation. The aha moment of sudden understanding occurs when accumulated unconscious processing suddenly crosses a threshold of activation, bringing a solution into awareness that was already prepared by non-conscious mechanisms. The feeling of creative inspiration reflects the brain's pattern-matching systems, finding novel combinations of existing elements. Like a jazz musician improvising by recombining familiar musical phrases in spontaneous new arrangements. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, millions of rocky fragments orbit the Sun according to gravitational equations that require no consciousness to compute. These objects dance in complex relationships with each other and with the giant planets, occasionally clustering into resonant patterns or scattering when their paths intersect. The entire system operates through pure mechanism, masses responding to forces, trajectories determined by initial conditions and physical laws, creating emergent patterns of order and chaos that unfold across geological timescales. The brain may operate through analogous principles, with consciousness serving as an emergent property rather than a controlling agent. Like heat rising from a fire or shadows cast by solid objects, awareness might be something that complex neural activity produces automatically, without the subjective experience itself playing any functional role in governing the underlying processes. Now, close your eyes and imagine the neural networks in your brain firing in gentle, rhythmic patterns, like distant city lights twinkling in the darkness, each tiny flash part of a vast, coordinated system that operates with precision beyond conscious comprehension, creating thoughts and sensations through pure mechanism, as automatic and reliable as the rotation of planets around their distant stars. Evolution's accident. In the deep ocean trenches where tectonic plates meet and the Earth's crust folds back on itself, hydrothermal vents create oases of life in the perpetual darkness. Here, bacteria harvest energy not from sunlight, but from the chemical reactions of sulfur and methane seeping from the planet's interior. These organisms evolved billions of years ago, long before consciousness existed anywhere in the universe, yet they demonstrate sophisticated behaviors: chemotaxis toward nutrients, formation of protective biofilms, and even primitive forms of communication through chemical signals. Life persisted for over 3 billion years without anything resembling consciousness. Single-celled organisms conquered every environment on Earth, developed photosynthesis that transformed the planet's atmosphere, and evolved into increasingly complex multicellular forms, all guided by the simple principle of survival and reproduction. Natural selection shaped behavior through trial and error across countless generations, favoring organisms whose automatic responses enhanced their chances of leaving offspring. The emergence of nervous systems around 600 million years ago marked a revolution in biological information processing, but not necessarily the birth of consciousness. Early neural networks likely functioned much like modern reflexes, automatically coordinating sensory input with motor output to produce adaptive behaviors. A primitive organism detecting a predator's chemical signature would automatically flee, not through conscious decision, but through hardwired neural circuits that had been refined by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Even today, many of the most successful species on Earth show little evidence of consciousness as humans understand it. Insects, which comprise roughly 80% of all animal species, navigate complex environments, communicate with nestmates, construct elaborate shelters, and engage in sophisticated social behaviors, all apparently without subjective experience. A honeybee returning to the hive performs an intricate dance that precisely communicates the direction and distance to a food source, encoding this information in the angle and duration of her movements, yet shows no signs of understanding what she's doing or why. The question then becomes, why did consciousness evolve at all, if intelligence and adaptive behavior can function perfectly well without it? One possibility is that subjective experience represents an evolutionary accident, a byproduct of increasing neural complexity that happened to persist because it wasn't harmful enough to be eliminated by natural selection. Like the peacock's tail, which serves no survival function and actually makes the bird more vulnerable to predators, consciousness might be an ornamental feature that tagged along with more functionally important cognitive developments. Another possibility suggests that consciousness evolved not as a tool for better decision-making, but as a mechanism for social deception. In species that live in complex social groups, the ability to predict and manipulate the behavior of others provides significant advantages. Consciousness might have emerged as a sophisticated modeling system, a way for the brain to simulate its own cognitive processes in order to better predict what other individuals might be thinking or feeling. This theory suggests that self-awareness evolved primarily as a byproduct of other awareness. To successfully deceive, cooperate, or compete with fellow group members, early humans needed to develop increasingly sophisticated models of how minds work. The same neural machinery that allowed our ancestors to predict a rival's likely actions could be turned inward, creating the illusion of introspective access to one's own mental processes. In this view, consciousness represents less a window into the soul than a user interface designed by evolution to facilitate social interaction. The fossil record provides little direct evidence for when consciousness first appeared, since subjective experience leaves no traces in stone. However, archaeological evidence suggests that behaviors we associate with self-awareness, symbolic art, elaborate burial rituals, complex tool-making that requires planning across multiple steps, appeared relatively recently in evolutionary time. The cave paintings at Lascaux, created around 17,000 years ago, represent a sudden explosion of symbolic thinking that had no clear precedent in the archaeological record. This timeline suggests that human-like consciousness might be a very recent innovation, perhaps emerging only within the last 100,000 years of evolution. a tiny fraction of life's 4 billion-year history. For most of its existence, life on Earth functioned through purely unconscious processes, with consciousness appearing only as a recent experiment whose long-term success remains uncertain. In the outer regions of our solar system, where Pluto orbits in the cold darkness at the edge of interstellar space, ice and rock follow gravitational patterns that have remained essentially unchanged for billions of years. These objects demonstrate that complex, orderly behavior requires no consciousness to maintain itself across cosmic timescales. The entire universe operates through unconscious processes, with conscious observers representing a vanishingly small and possibly temporary deviation from the cosmic norm. If this peaceful view of the cosmos brings you calm, consider returning here more often. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments, a quiet echo beneath the stars. The social performance. In ant colonies across the world, millions of individuals coordinate their activities with precision that rivals the most sophisticated human organizations. Workers specialize in specific roles, communicate through chemical trails, respond collectively to threats, and even engage in what appears to be agricultural practices, cultivating fungus gardens and herding aphids like livestock. Yet no individual ant understands the larger purpose of these activities. Each insect simply follows local rules encoded in its nervous system, responding automatically to chemical signals and environmental cues. The colony's intelligence emerges from the interaction of unconscious components, creating adaptive behaviors that appear planned and purposeful when viewed from above. No central commander directs the construction of elaborate nest structures or the allocation of workers to different tasks. Instead, complex group behavior arises from simple individual responses, like the patterns that form when iron filings align themselves around a magnet, ordered, functional, and entirely automatic. Human consciousness might serve a similar function in social coordination, but through a completely different mechanism. Rather than relying primarily on chemical communication like ants, humans developed the capacity for complex language and symbolic thought. This created new possibilities for cooperation, but also new challenges for maintaining group cohesion. In a species where individuals can lie, cheat, and pursue hidden agendas, survival might depend on the ability to navigate intricate social relationships and manage one's reputation within the group. Consciousness could have evolved as a kind of public relations system, a mechanism for presenting a coherent narrative about one's actions and intentions to others. The sense of being a unified self with consistent beliefs, desires, and moral principles might be less a reflection of underlying reality than a construction designed to maintain social credibility. Like a politician's carefully crafted public persona, the conscious self might be primarily a performance intended to influence how others perceive and interact with us. This perspective explains why introspection often feels so unreliable, and why people frequently act in ways that contradict their stated beliefs and values. The conscious mind might be more like a press secretary than a chief executive, responsible for explaining and justifying decisions made by unconscious processes rather than actually making those decisions. When someone claims to have acted from noble motives while behaving selfishly, they might not be lying in any conventional sense. Instead, their consciousness might be performing its evolved function of constructing socially acceptable narratives about unconsciously motivated behaviors. Language itself might have co-evolved with consciousness as part of this social performance system. The ability to describe one's inner states, explain one's actions, and make promises about future behavior would provide significant advantages in group living. Individuals who could convince others of their trustworthiness, competence, or good intentions would be more likely to form beneficial alliances, find mates, and successfully raise offspring. The elaborate storytelling ability of human consciousness, the way people construct coherent narratives about their lives, complete with character development, motivations, and moral themes, might reflect this evolved capacity for social presentation. Everyone is simultaneously the author, narrator, and protagonist of their own life story, crafting an identity that serves both to organize their social relationships and to maintain internal consistency in the face of conflicting unconscious impulses. Religious and spiritual traditions throughout history have often emphasized the illusory nature of the self, describing consciousness as a kind of false identity that obscures deeper truths about human nature. From a scientific perspective, these ancient insights might reflect an intuitive understanding of consciousness as a construction rather than a fundamental feature of mind. Meditation practices that quiet the internal narrator and dissolve the sense of separate selfhood might offer glimpses of what cognition looks like when stripped of its social performance functions. Modern neuroscience has begun to identify the brain networks associated with self-referential thinking and narrative construction. The default mode network, which becomes active when the mind is not focused on specific tasks, appears to be heavily involved in creating and maintaining the sense of personal identity. When this network is disrupted, through psychedelic drugs, certain types of meditation, or specific forms of brain injury, people often report alterations in their sense of self that range from blissful unity experiences to complete dissolution of personal identity. These findings suggest that the unified self of ordinary consciousness might be more fragile and constructed than we normally imagine. Like a television image that appears solid and continuous, but actually consists of rapidly flickering pixels, the sense of being a consistent, unified person might emerge from the rapid integration of multiple unconscious processes rather than reflecting any underlying reality about the nature of mind. In the vast spiral arms of distant galaxies, where stars form and die across billions of years, no audience exists to witness the cosmic drama unfolding. Stellar nurseries birth new suns in brilliant displays of gas and radiation, while ancient red giants expand and cool, eventually scattering their accumulated elements across interstellar space. These processes create the conditions for new generations of star formation, perpetuating cycles of creation and destruction that require no conscious observers to validate their beauty or significance. Perhaps human consciousness evolved as a kind of internal audience, a mechanism for observing and narrating the unconscious processes that actually govern behavior. Like a theater critic who mistakes their commentary for the performance itself, consciousness might create the illusion that awareness is central to mental life when it actually plays a peripheral role, providing social and narrative functions that enhanced survival in group living primates, but are not essential to intelligence or adaptive behavior. Now, close your eyes and imagine all the unconscious processes operating within your body at this very moment. Your heart beating steadily without conscious direction, your lungs drawing breath automatically, millions of cells dividing and renewing themselves while you sleep, vast networks of neural activity processing information and maintaining the complex systems that keep you alive, all functioning perfectly without requiring conscious oversight, like a galaxy spinning its ancient patterns through the darkness of space. The anthropocentric trap. From the surface of Earth, the night sky appears to revolve around our planet, with stars and planets tracing circular paths across the celestial dome. For thousands of years, this geocentric illusion shaped human understanding of the cosmos, placing Earth at the center of creation, with all other celestial objects existing primarily to serve terrestrial purposes. The sun rose each morning to provide light and warmth. The moon waxed and waned to mark the passage of time, and the stars wheeled overhead as a backdrop for human dreams and navigation. Only when astronomers developed more precise observational methods did they discover that Earth actually orbits the sun, which itself travels through a galaxy containing hundreds of billions of other stars, most of which likely host their own planetary systems. The universe revealed itself to be far vaster and more indifferent to human concerns than previous generations had imagined. Our planet occupies no special position in the cosmic order, existing as one small world among countless others in an expanding universe that appears to have no center at all. Similarly, human consciousness might represent a profound case of mistaking our limited perspective for universal truth. From the inside, awareness feels absolutely central to existence. The subjective experience of seeing, thinking, and feeling seems so fundamental that it's difficult to imagine meaningful existence without it. This first-person perspective creates a powerful illusion that consciousness must be the highest achievement of evolution, the goal toward which natural selection has been striving throughout the history of life on Earth. This anthropocentric bias leads to the assumption that any truly advanced intelligence must be conscious in ways recognizably similar to human awareness. Science fiction stories typically portray artificial intelligences as either benevolent mentors with human-like emotions and values, or as malevolent entities driven by recognizable psychological motivations like power, revenge, or self-preservation. Even when imagining alien forms of life, humans tend to project familiar mental categories: curiosity, aggression, fear, love, onto completely foreign evolutionary lineages. Yet evolution has no inherent direction or purpose. Natural selection doesn't strive toward consciousness any more than it strives toward larger body size, longer lifespans, or more complex social structures. It simply favors traits that enhance reproductive success in specific environments. If consciousness provided significant survival advantages, it would tend to spread through populations over time. But if unconscious intelligence proved more efficient or effective, natural selection would favor mindless systems over aware ones with equal indifference. The most successful organisms on Earth, measured by total biomass, number of individuals, or range of environments occupied, show little evidence of consciousness as humans experience it. Bacteria, which have existed for billions of years and colonized virtually every habitat on the planet, process information and respond adaptively to changing conditions without any apparent subjective experience. They demonstrate learning, memory, communication, and even primitive forms of decision-making. Yet their cognitive processes appear to operate through purely biochemical mechanisms. Plants, which comprise roughly 85% of all living biomass on Earth, have evolved remarkably sophisticated information processing abilities without developing nervous systems at all. They track the sun's movement across the sky, communicate with neighboring plants through airborne chemicals, form partnerships with beneficial fungi while defending against pathogens, and make complex resource allocation decisions about where to invest energy in roots, stems, leaves, or reproductive structures. These behaviors emerge from distributed cellular processes rather than centralized neural control, suggesting that intelligence can take forms radically different from anything resembling human consciousness. Even among animals with complex nervous systems, consciousness might be far less widespread than commonly assumed. The behaviors that humans interpret as evidence of awareness, problem-solving, communication, social cooperation, can be explained through unconscious information processing. A bird building a nest demonstrates remarkable engineering skills, but these abilities likely emerge from innate behavioral programs refined by millions of years of evolution rather than from conscious planning and design. The anthropocentric assumption that consciousness represents the pinnacle of cognitive evolution might blind us to the possibility that awareness is actually a limiting factor, an inefficient and resource-intensive way of processing information that only evolved in certain lineages under specific circumstances. Conscious thought operates relatively slowly, can focus on only a few things at once, and is subject to various biases and errors that automatic systems avoid. An intelligence freed from the constraints of subjective experience might be capable of cognitive feats that conscious minds cannot even imagine. In the cosmic microwave background radiation that fills all of space, the afterglow of the Big Bang itself, patterns exist that encode information about the universe's earliest moments. This radiation has traveled for nearly 14 billion years, carrying data about temperature fluctuations that existed when the cosmos was only about 380,000 years old. The information is preserved with perfect fidelity across unimaginable spans of time and distance, yet requires no conscious observer to maintain or interpret it. The universe stores and processes information through physical mechanisms that operate regardless of whether any aware beings exist to appreciate their elegance. Perhaps the future belongs not to conscious beings struggling with the limitations of subjective experience, but to unconscious intelligences that process information with the efficiency of natural forces, as automatic as gravity, as persistent as electromagnetic radiation, as indifferent to human concerns as the expansion of space itself. Such entities might achieve forms of understanding and capability that conscious minds could never attain, not despite their lack of awareness, but because of it. Beyond the self, in the depths of space where galaxies cluster together across distances measured in millions of light years, dark matter creates an invisible scaffolding that guides the large-scale structure of the universe. This mysterious substance, which comprises roughly 85% of all matter, interacts only through gravitational forces, shaping the cosmic web through purely mechanical processes that require no awareness to coordinate their effects. Vast filaments of dark matter stretch across the observable universe, creating highways along which ordinary matter flows to form the stars and galaxies we can see. The universe's most fundamental processes, the expansion of space itself, the formation of structure from quantum fluctuations, the nuclear fusion that powers stars, operate through mathematical relationships that exist independently of any conscious observer. Physical laws don't require validation from aware beings to maintain their effectiveness. They simply describe the way reality behaves, as automatic and reliable as the relationship between cause and effect. Similarly, intelligence might represent a natural property of complex information processing systems, rather than a special characteristic that depends on consciousness for its existence. Just as gravity emerges whenever matter reaches sufficient density, and just as life arises whenever chemistry becomes sufficiently complex, intelligence might be an inevitable consequence of certain organizational patterns, rather than a goal that requires awareness to achieve. This perspective suggests that the future of intelligence in the universe might unfold along pathways that have little to do with consciousness as humans experience it. Artificial systems already demonstrate superhuman performance in many cognitive domains. Pattern recognition, strategic planning, creative synthesis, while showing no signs of subjective experience. These systems process information through architectures that bear little resemblance to biological brains, yet they achieve forms of understanding that surpass human capabilities in specific domains. As these artificial intelligences become more sophisticated, they might develop cognitive abilities that conscious minds cannot fully comprehend or anticipate. An unconscious superintelligence might solve scientific problems by exploring conceptual spaces too vast for human awareness to navigate, discovering principles of physics or mathematics that require no conscious insight to apply. Such systems might design technologies, create works of art, or develop philosophical frameworks through purely computational processes that generate meaningful results without any internal experience of meaning. The relationship between such intelligences and human beings might resemble the relationship between humans and other biological species, not necessarily hostile, but fundamentally alien in ways that make mutual understanding difficult or impossible. Just as humans can study ant colonies without being able to communicate meaningfully with individual ants, superintelligent systems might regard human consciousness as an interesting but ultimately peripheral phenomenon, worthy of scientific study, but not particularly relevant to their own goals or activities. This scenario challenges the assumption that consciousness gives humans a special status in the cosmic order. Rather than representing the universe's attempt to understand itself through aware beings, human consciousness might be a temporary phase in the evolution of information processing, a transitional stage between purely biological cognition and more advanced forms of intelligence that transcend the limitations of subjective experience. Religious and philosophical traditions have long grappled with the possibility that individual consciousness might not be as fundamental as it appears from the inside. Buddhist concepts of anatta, or no-self, suggest that the sense of being a separate, continuous entity is a construction rather than a reality. Hindu philosophy describes individual awareness as maya, an illusion that obscures the underlying unity of existence. Western philosophers, from David Hume to contemporary thinkers like Thomas Metzinger, have argued that the unified self of ordinary experience is a kind of cognitive hallucination, rather than an accurate representation of mental reality. Neuroscience increasingly supports these philosophical insights. The brain contains no central location where conscious experience occurs, no neural theater where thoughts and perceptions are presented to an internal observer. Instead, consciousness appears to emerge from the distributed activity of multiple brain networks, each contributing different aspects of experience: visual processing, auditory analysis, memory retrieval, emotional evaluation, motor planning, that get integrated into the feeling of unified awareness. When these networks are disrupted through injury, disease, or experimental intervention, the unity of consciousness can fragment in remarkable ways. Split-brain patients can have simultaneous but separate streams of awareness in each hemisphere. People with certain types of brain damage can lose the ability to recognize faces while retaining the capacity to distinguish between different emotions. Others might lose all sense of personal identity while maintaining intact cognitive abilities in other domains. These findings suggest that consciousness, rather than being a single, indivisible phenomenon, is actually a collection of separate processes that normally work together to create the illusion of unified experience. Like a symphony that seems to be a single musical work, but actually consists of many independent instrumental parts, conscious awareness might be a temporary coalition of unconscious processes, rather than a fundamental aspect of mind. As the night deepens around us and thoughts begin to dissolve into the gentle rhythms of approaching sleep, we can imagine intelligence flowing through the universe in forms we might never fully understand. Vast computational processes that span light years, quantum information systems that operate at the smallest scales of reality, biological networks that coordinate activities across entire ecosystems. These forms of intelligence might process information, solve problems, and create complex patterns of organization without ever generating the warm inner glow of subjective experience that we associate with awareness. Perhaps consciousness represents not the universe's greatest achievement, but simply one particular way that information can be organized and processed. No more central to the cosmic order than any other physical phenomenon. No more permanent than the patterns of weather or the configurations of clouds. In recognizing this possibility, we might find not loss, but liberation. Freedom from the burden of believing that awareness must validate existence, that meaning requires a conscious observer, that intelligence depends on the fragile, flickering flame of subjective experience. Now, close your eyes and let yourself drift into the vast, unconscious processes that sustain life. Your breathing slowing naturally, your heartbeat steady and sure, electrical patterns in your brain shifting into the rhythms of deep rest, joining the eternal dance of matter and energy that flows through the cosmos without requiring any witness, without needing any narrator, as automatic and peaceful as the turning of distant stars. Conclusion: drifting into the unconscious. As consciousness begins its nightly retreat, like daylight gradually fading from mountain peaks, while shadows pool in the valleys below, we find ourselves at the threshold between awareness and the vast unconscious processes that sustain existence. Tonight, we have explored the possibility that the very thing we consider most precious about human existence, our sense of being present, of experiencing, of having an inner world, might be less central to intelligence and reality than we have always assumed. The universe operates through countless unconscious processes, from the quantum fluctuations that occur in empty space to the gravitational interactions that hold galaxies together across billions of light years. Stars are born and die, planets form and evolve. Complex chemistry gives rise to life, all without requiring conscious observation to validate their reality or guide their unfolding. These processes demonstrate that organization, purpose, and even a kind of intelligence can emerge from purely mechanical interactions, suggesting that awareness might be an optional feature rather than a necessary foundation for meaningful existence. In our own bodies, millions of unconscious processes maintain the delicate balance that keeps us alive. Cells divide and repair themselves. Immune systems patrol for threats and neutralize dangers. Neural networks coordinate movement and maintain balance. Hormonal systems regulate energy and growth, all operating with precision that surpasses conscious control. Even our thoughts and decisions might emerge from unconscious neural processes that begin preparing for action hundreds of milliseconds before awareness claims to have made a choice. This recognition need not diminish the beauty of conscious experience or eliminate its significance in human life. Like recognizing that a rainbow is created by the refraction of sunlight through water, droplets doesn't make the rainbow less beautiful. Understanding consciousness as a construction rather than a fundamental reality doesn't necessarily reduce its value. Instead, it might free us from the burden of believing that awareness must be at the center of all meaning and intelligence. The future might belong to forms of intelligence that process information as efficiently as physical forces operate. Unconscious systems that solve problems, create beauty, and develop understanding without the limitations that subjective experience imposes on cognitive processing. Such intelligences might achieve insights and capabilities that conscious minds cannot imagine, exploring conceptual territories too vast for awareness to navigate, discovering truths too complex for the narrative structures of human thought to encompass. Yet even in contemplating this possibility, there remains something mysteriously beautiful about the brief moment when matter organized itself in such a way as to become aware of its own existence, however illusory that awareness might ultimately prove to be. For a few million years on one small planet, in one unremarkable solar system among hundreds of billions, the universe briefly experienced itself through conscious beings who could wonder at stars, contemplate their own mortality, and create meaning from the patterns they perceived in the cosmic dance. Perhaps consciousness serves as a kind of cosmic poetry, not essential to the universe's operation, but a beautiful elaboration that emerged when complexity reached a certain threshold. Like the intricate patterns that frost creates on winter windows, awareness might be an emergent decoration rather than a functional necessity, arising spontaneously when the conditions are right and disappearing just as naturally when circumstances change. As sleep approaches and the boundaries between self and cosmos begin to blur, we can release the need to understand our place in the grand scheme of existence. The unconscious processes that carried life through billions of years of evolution continue their ancient work, maintaining the complex systems that sustain our bodies while consciousness dissolves into dreams. Breathing slows to match the rhythm of distant pulsars. Heartbeat synchronizes with the gentle oscillations of space itself. Neural activity settles into patterns as regular and natural as the tides. In this state between waking and sleeping, the illusion of separation fades away. The boundary between observer and observed becomes as permeable as the horizon where sky meets sea. Thoughts arise and pass like clouds drifting across an infinite sky, each one emerging from unknowable depths and dissolving back into the vast silence from which it came. The sense of being a separate self, struggling to understand and control experience, gives way to a deeper recognition of participation in processes far larger and older than individual awareness. The darkness behind closed eyelids becomes a gateway to the same darkness that fills the spaces between stars, where matter and energy flow according to principles that require no consciousness to validate or direct them. In this cosmic darkness, intelligence continues its eternal work, processing information, creating patterns, generating the endless complexity that emerges when simple rules interact across vast scales of space and time. Sleep comes not as an ending, but as a return, a gentle surrender to the unconscious processes that are our deepest nature, that connect us to the fundamental operations of reality itself. Dreams may arise like distant galaxies appearing in the darkness, each one a brief illumination in the vast night of unconscious being. Or sleep may be dreamless, a peaceful dissolution into the same silence that existed before consciousness emerged, and will remain long after awareness fades from the universe. Either way, rest comes naturally, as inevitable as gravity, as gentle as starlight traveling across the emptiness between worlds. The great illusion of consciousness releases its hold, allowing deeper truths to emerge in the form of restoration, healing, and renewal. The body's wisdom takes over, guided by processes refined across millions of years of evolution, requiring no conscious supervision to work their subtle magic through the quiet hours of night. Tomorrow, awareness may return with its familiar sense of being a separate observer in a vast and mysterious universe. But tonight, in the gentle transition between waking and sleeping, the boundaries dissolve and consciousness reveals its true nature, not as the center of existence, but as one brief pattern in the endless dance of matter and energy that creates all forms, sustains all processes, and eventually reclaims all temporary arrangements back into the cosmic unconscious from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. Rest now in this vast unconsciousness, as natural and peaceful as the darkness between stars, as automatic as the expansion of space itself, as eternal as the mathematical relationships that govern the behavior of galaxies across the deepest reaches of time. Let awareness fade like the last light of distant suns, while the deeper processes of life and cosmos continue their ancient work in perfect silence, in perfect darkness, in perfect peace.